Hi, welcome to this presentation on the importance of mixed biodiverse food landscapes and the need for a leading role of food forestry when the ambition is to make agriculture truly circular, truly sustainable and truly nature inclusive. My name is Jelle Vekkes. I'm a landscape architect in Haarlem, the Netherlands. Our agriculture must become circular, said our former Minister of Agriculture, Nature and Food Quality, Carole Schouten. Interesting because the agriculture we invented 10,000 years ago never has been circular. And by intensifying the system, we eliminated nature, which do tend to create abundance. So how are we going to do that? Make agriculture circular for the first time in history? In the Netherlands, there's quite a lot of interest in food forestry, also among policy makers. Yet I'm not convinced that this concept is valued as the one true solution to the problems we face in agriculture and biodiversity loss. Even though it's mentioned here and there with positive attention to the many ecosystem services it provides. I think food forestry as a true dominant part of agriculture is what we need to heal the ecosystem and at the same time nourish the world. Together with other forms of sustainable farming, they can form a healthy biodiverse ecosystem with all successional degrees from field to forest and with access to a natural supply of nutrients. I want to take you on a bird's eye view through some policy documents and let my ideas land in a cheerful sketch. In 2018, the Dutch Ministry of Agriculture, Nature and Food Quality indicated that we must switch to circular agriculture in order to prevent the depletion of soil, water and raw materials and an unacceptable increase in global temperature. They are committed to a paradigm change, from emphasis on cost reduction and increased production to a reduction in input and the exchange of raw materials and residual flows between the different chains. In livestock farming, the focus is on growing the forage locally, use the manure well, and combat gas emissions. In vegetable cultivation, the focus is on precision agriculture. Advanced technology should make it possible to switch from monocultures to mixed crops with the smart use of advanced plant breeding, prevention of diseases, pests and weeds. At the same time, agroforestry and permaculture are mentioned. Moreover, agriculture and nature should be linked and reinforce each other. Based on the idea that forests are important for achieving nature and climate goals, the Ministry and joint provinces also wrote a forest strategy. It aims at an increase of Dutch forests with 10% in 2030 and enhance quality of existing forests by making them more diverse. It is stated that in addition to nature values, the forest can have use values for wood, food, water storage, CO2 storage and recreation. Landscape quality is at the starting point. Forests should be robust and serve as a buffer between various functions such as city and country or nature and agriculture. The forest strategy also focuses on an increase in the number of woody landscape elements such as hedgerows, shrubs, hedges and loose trees in rural areas. The strategy recognizes that agroforestry, food forestry included, can make a good contribution both as forests as well as landscape elements. How did that happen? With the creation of Food Forest Ketelbroek, Wouter van Eck created a real Dutch food forest movement that has already led to the creation of the National Foundation for Food Forestry and the Green Deal for Food Forestry together with national and local governments and a fair number of social institutions. While a large number of inspired private individuals are setting up small-scale food forests, the Foundation is working hard to support farmers in realizing rational, productive and profitable food forests. It is great that this grassroots movement is reflected in policy. But as I said, I do wonder whether its real significance for true circular agriculture is understood and recognized. So I would like to pay more attention to three things. First, it has long been known and recognized that forests store CO2 and buffer water. But is the role of three fungal relationships in the release of nutrients from mineral soil also sufficiently known and recognized? It does not appear to be mentioned in the policy papers, regardless of the advice that the Green Deal wrote in the run-up to the forest strategy. It may not be understood or taken seriously, while it is a core value that really makes it possible to produce CO2 positive food. It is the key to food production that provides more calories than it takes. It is the key to true circular agriculture. And with hardly any human interference or input, it is very cost effective and extremely biodiverse. And I really think that needs more emphasis. Second, I would also like to emphasize that this quality distinguishes food forests from other forms of agroforestry, as the optimal tree-fungal relationship comes into its own in the undisturbed forest floor. It is therefore important to give real food forests a dominant position in agriculture, eventually alongside other forms of agroforestry. Third, there's a very simple principle that works in our favor when we use it. Land wants to become forest. The potential natural vegetation in Europe consists largely of deciduous forests, mixed deciduous coniferous forests, and some swamp forests. Looking at the Netherlands, at present only 8.5% is forest, many of it on individual plots smaller than 5 hectares. It takes a lot of energy to keep the country that open, whether it concerns agricultural land, roadsides, nature reserves or raked parks. If we flip the system with afforestation, we can win twice. We can save energy and we can gain energy. The fact that major changes are needed to cope with rising sea levels, extreme weather, the growing world population and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions prompted Wageningen University and Research in 2019 to outline a vision for the future of the Netherlands in 100 years' time. It is called A More Natural Future for the Netherlands, but above all it offers a technical and technological perspective, reflecting the Netherlands as a true country of engineering. In this vision, circular agriculture is seen as a result of high-tech precision agriculture, aimed at reducing and reusing raw materials and adapting climate-related extremes by genetically modeling plants, instead of, or perhaps in addition to, the search for natural resilience by mimicking nature. In this vision, nature is merely seen as a supplier of ecosystem services, and food forests are an interesting way of dressing the city for recreation, which in itself is an excellent idea. Although the vision contains many interesting lines of thought, it seems, especially in the field of agriculture, to offer hardly any real perspective on the bio-based circular society it promises. In essence, the system of energy-consuming overexploitation remains unchanged. The belief that they can work it out differently this time is again based on potentially dangerous technology rather than ecological principles. I am convinced that what we need is research by design, based on a natural ecosystem, and we have to look for the simplest solutions that nature offers. That certainly does not start with manipulating crops at the gene level to deal with drought or salt, which is ultimately nothing more than symptom relief, instead of restoring a healthy ecosystem. We have to engineer with the natural ecosystem at hand, and let technology serve, not rule. Let me give you some general insight in the Dutch landscape. The Netherlands is a delta where the mineral soil consists of a layered sediments of sand, silt, clay and loess that have been supplied from the mountains by the rivers Rhine and Meuse and deposited by the sea and the wind. It resulted in an imperceptibly sloping landscape from east to west, with several moraines and dunes along the sea and the rivers. Former marshes in the north and west have led to peat formation, which have been partly excavated for fuel. In this water-rich landscape, we structurally protected and reclaimed land from the water. It's a landscape with mounds, polders, embankments and reclaimed land, with rivers, peat streams and canals. Differences in regional circumstances and exploitation have led to a number of landscapes with their own, as we like to call them, cultural, historical characteristics. Characteristics that we attach great value to, because they give a landscape individuality, quality and recognizability, and because they tell something about where we come from and what we have achieved. That is why those landscape values are often protected in our zoning plans against interventions that are considered a disruption. In practice, these disruptions often turns out to be new forms of land use or the use of trees. Change comes in waves. And while we are clearly at a tipping point in time, with enormous tasks at hand, our policy is still restrictive, aimed at preserving what we once made, even if that creation adds to the problems we now face. But as history stacks layer upon layer, there must always be room for innovation. The images of these characteristic landscapes come from the advice the Council of Government Advisors wrote for the forest strategy the former minister was going to write. Although these government advisors may not see the value of food forests in their full extent either, in their advice they do offer much more space for forests outside the current enclaves and much more space for trees outside the forests than local spatial planning officers tend to allow in the so-called characteristic landscapes. They see value in the return of the many old landscape elements that were lost during scaling ups, and understand that you can do that in an innovative form, with new functions where old functions no longer apply. Agroforestry and food forestry are seen as a suitable application for both forest and landscape elements. On the other hand, their attitude towards cultural historical values, although more flexible than a general trend, is still relatively restrictive. It's true, in addition to restoring lost landscape elements, they do see opportunities for new, preferably robust forest structures. At the same time, they see historical characteristics like openness as a core value. While they offer opportunities, they do not address what ultimately matters. What would happen if we did not focus on cultural historical landscapes, but on sustainable agriculture instead? Cultural history can't be a core value. For sure, it's an important sub-value which must be dealt with carefully. But true core values can be derived, for example, from the three ethical principles: planet, people and profit. From this base, we can achieve fair landscapes for every living being. Cultural historical landscapes often arose through agricultural use, in conjunction with the landscape and habitation. Why not apply the same principle for the much needed sustainable innovation? You probably will understand by now that I think it wise to give food forestry a central role in agriculture. But let's look at landscape elements as a windbreak. Windbreaks add great value to arable and horticulture. Wind dries the crops, and removing wind stress leads to a considerable increase in production. This positive effect has a length for approximately 8 times the height of the windbreak. So an optimal application is related to the most common wind direction and to the landscape design. Suppose we design a windbreak as a linear food forest. A food forest is quickly higher, so it offers even more shelter. And in addition to providing windage, it offers many more ecosystem services, and it also significantly broadens the production range. Now let's take a cultural historical landscape, preferably a UNESCO World Heritage Renaissance polder from the 16th century. The Beemster is a polder that appeals to the imagination with an orthogonal structure of avenues and waterways. Openness is a core value. It used to be a lake. The design shows our superior attitude to nature. The design is not optimal for agriculture though. For example, the avenues do not function as windbreaks, but rather direct the wind along the bottom of the treetops towards the field, which creates extra wind stress. Closed windbreaks might have been better, but would have only limited effect on this scale. For an optimal de-stressing effect, I convert a third of the agricultural fields into food forest elements. The rational Renaissance pattern is ideal for an effective setup, which can be designed in different ways and can partly be filled with other forms of agroforestry, such as tree meadows for a combination of, for example, cows and cherries. Ultimately, every sustainable agricultural activity in this system benefits from shelter, biodiversity, and a good water buffer nearby. Thank you.